God, hear me as I pray to you. Pay attention to my groaning. Listen to my cry for help.
I am worn out from sobbing. All night I flood my bed with weeping, drenching it with tears.
My vision is blurred by my grief. My eyes are worn out.
God, why do you stand so far away? Why do you hide when I am in trouble?
How long will you forget me? Forever? How long will you look the other way? How long do I have to struggle with anguish in my soul, with sorrow in my heart?
Turn and answer me, God. Wake up. Why do you sleep? Get up.
Do not reject me forever.
Why do you look the other way?
Why do you ignore my suffering?
Why are you so far away when I groan for help?
Every day I call to you, God, but you do not answer. Every night you hear my voice, but I find no relief.
My
My
God,
God,
my God,
why have you abandoned me?
This is the word of the Lord.
The scripture readings for today are from the Gospel of Matthew, Matthew 11, 1 through 5. After Jesus had finished instructing his 12 disciples, he went on from there to teach and preach in the towns of Galilee. When John, who was in prison, heard about the deeds of the Messiah, he sent his disciples to ask him, "Are you the one who is to come, or should we expect someone else?" Jesus replied, "Go back and report to John what you hear and see. The blind receive sight, the lame walk, those who have leprosy are cleansed, the deaf hear, the dead are raised, and the good news is proclaimed to the poor. Blessed is anyone who does not stumble on account of me." Matthew 16, 1 through 4. The Pharisees and Sadducees came to Jesus and tested him by asking him to show them a sign from heaven. He replied, "When evening comes, you say, 'It will be fair weather, for the sky is red.' And in the morning, 'Today it will be stormy, for the sky is red and overcast.' You know how to interpret the appearance of the sky, but you cannot interpret the sign of the times. A wicked and adulterous generation looks for a sign, but none will be given it except the sign of Jonah." Jesus then left them and went away. The word of the Lord.
It's kind of amazing to me that the words that were read earlier, that group of 3 readers, that those words are from the Bible. They're from the Psalms. They're the prayers of David, one of the heroes of the faith. They're the hymns of Israel that were sung publicly for thousands of years. They've been on the lips of faithful Jews and Christians for centuries. And they are the very prayers of Jesus that he prayed throughout his life and even in his last moments on the cross. Thanks be to God. Struggling with God, I think, is a part of the life of the people of God and always has been. Even the name of God's people, Israel, comes from the experience of struggle with God. It comes from the event in Jacob's life where he's about to meet with his brother Esau. They've been estranged for years, and he doesn't know what's going to happen in the morning. Very likely he and his family could be attacked. And although Jacob has God's promise, the situation itself is not promising. And so Jacob goes off into the desert, and he's there alone. He's there all night, and a man comes to him and struggles with him. And it's not just some random insomniac wrestler who sort of lost his way in the wilderness. By the end of the story, you realize that this is God himself that Jacob is wrestling with. And by the end, Jacob realizes it too. And so he holds on to the man as the sun comes up, and he says, "I will not let you go unless you bless me." And what Jacob receives from the man is a broken hip and a new name. God dubs him Israel, one who struggles with God. And I don't think that that name is just to describe the experience of Jacob's life, but I think it's the life of the people of God throughout their history. For better or for worse, for righteous or for sin, God's people have struggled with God throughout all of their history. Struggled to believe, struggled to trust, struggled to be faithful. And so I think that somehow the experience of struggle can be a part of even the life of a faithful follower of God today. I think that we have to understand where the place of wrestle and questioning and struggling with God fits into our lives. And we need to ask the question, How can this be something that leads us closer to God? I think it's so interesting that as we prepared for this service, that it was so difficult for us to find songs that honestly expressed the struggle of faith. The struggle of faith that in our hearts we all know, but it doesn't seem like we have public words to use for them. There's laments all over the Bible, but there are no laments in the song selections that I could go to on the internet, in the 21st century. I think it's so interesting that the expression, "Where are you, God?" to us sounds like the sign of a wavering and weak faith, like spiritual unhealth, that we don't have a place for that in the healthy life of a believer. And so that's what I want to look at today. My experience with doubt personally didn't come until I was an adult. I would say that as I grew up, I had a pretty unwavering faith in Jesus and the Scriptures. But I think that all changed when I went through a season where I just couldn't tell where God was at work. I heard people all around me, they would talk about seeing God at work, and they would talk about hearing from God. And I'd look at those things, and maybe I was just being cynical, I don't know. But I would look at things and see, that just kind of looks like a coincidence. Now, that sounds just like wishful thinking. And I knew in my own experience that there were times when I thought God had told me something, but I realized later that that was just sort of me wishing to believe something or me misreading a circumstance. And so I would look at things and I would wonder if anybody really knew where God was at work, if anybody could actually tell what God was doing. And when I started to question that, I started to ask the question, is God even doing anything? I'd look at people who would talk about their lives being changed. I was in ministry, so it was my job to sort of tell people this. If you come to Jesus, your life will be transformed. And I'd listen to these stories, and I'd look at people who had been Christians a long time. And I don't mean to judge people, but I did. And I'd look at them and I'd say, you know what? A lot of times I think your life transformation looks a lot like you just managed your sin real well, not real transformation. And I'd look at people who came from really desperate situations, and they honestly came and they said, I'm going to try this Jesus thing, I'm going to do this church thing, I'm going to be a part of this, and they really sought after things, and they were coming from tough places, and we tell them, God will change you. And they'd come, and they'd try, and they'd be a part of things, and 6 months, a year or so later, they're back in their own life, and the only thing that has changed was that they've written off God as a way to address their problems. So I asked the question, is this whole offer of transformation, is this real? Do we really think that this can happen? Where is God in this situation? I don't know where your questions come from. I don't know what they look like for you. I don't know if they come from personal pain or intellectual questions or whatever, but I think we all have them. Maybe even the experience of grad school is raising questions for you. One of the wonderful things about higher education is that the more you learn, the more you realize your intellectual opponents are not idiots. They don't hold the positions they hold because they have bad reasons or because they're stupid. You can't read what people write and hear what people say and just dismiss them as if they don't know what they're talking about. You have to take them seriously. And at the same time, the more you study, the more you realize your own positions are not unquestionable. They're not, foolproof. Even arguments that convince you are not airtight. And you may hold to a position, but you always have to be open to the possibility that there are questions and objections that you need to hear, and this is a good thing. And the wonderful thing about this is if we take this seriously, this should make us more charitable people, more humble people. But the sort of shadow side of that wonderful thing is that it also can erode confidence. It can eat away at certainty. And it can chip away at convictions that we have, and we don't know what to do about it. And this experience is really kind of unsettling. It's really scary. James says that the one who doubts is like a wave of the sea, blown and tossed by the wind. The experience of doubt makes you feel like there's no solid ground to stand on, like there's no place to fix your anchor in the midst of chaos. And it's not only scary, it's also dangerous. Doubt eats away at your trust in God. It puts a wedge between you and the only one who can give you life. And so it's not something to be trifled with. It's not just a small thing. It's something we need to take seriously. But here's the real problem. The problem is questions and uncertainty. They're inevitable. Paul tells us that we see as through a mirror darkly, that we only know in part. One day we're going to fully know and we're going to see face to face. But until then, there's a limit onto how much certainty we can have with anything that we know. And that's the difficult part. That we will face uncertainty, we will face questions. And so the issue for us is not how to avoid those uncertainties and questions, it's how to respond to them in a way that is faithful. It's how do we use those questions and uncertainties to draw us towards God and towards faithfulness and not push us away. In other words, how do we doubt well? I think the readings from the gospel that we heard give us some illustrations of how we might go about doubting well or doubting poorly. We've got two sides of the picture. You've got John the Baptist and you've got the Pharisees and the Sadducees. And Jesus tells us that John the Baptist is the greatest person who ever lived before the coming of the kingdom. He's a prophet. He was called from the womb. His birth was accompanied by angelic announcements and miraculous signs. He was a faithful man. He went out, he preached his message. He saw results. He saw people from throughout the land come and repent and be baptized. And when he saw Jesus, he recognized him as the Messiah. He saw the Spirit come down on him. He heard the voice of the Father saying, "This is my beloved Son." If there is anybody, anywhere, ever, who should have no uncertainty about who Jesus is, it's John the Baptist. And yet in this story, that's exactly what's going on. He's wondering. He's questioning. He's uncertain. There's situations in John's life that make him wonder if God's really at work here. He's been arrested. He's in prison. The threat of execution is looming. He's looking at Jesus, and he had predicted that Jesus would be a man who would bring fire. But it sure looks like he's a man who's befriending sinners and Gentiles and offering forgiveness and mercy, and he's certainly not starting a revolution. So what is going on? It doesn't seem like he's about to bust down Herod's door and get John out. So John wonders, is this the one that we've been looking for? Was I wrong? But what John does is great. He doesn't stay with those doubts in his jail cell and let them fester. He sends his disciples and he says, "Jesus, I got a question. Are you the one?" And Jesus responds by giving him some reasons to maintain confidence. He says, "Look, the blind see, the deaf hear, the lepers are cleansed, the lame are walking, the dead are being raised, good news is being preached to the poor. Blessed are you if you don't get turned off by my unexpected behavior." He says, "John, I hear your doubt. Let me give you something to give you confidence." But on the other hand, we have the Pharisees and the Sadducees. And they too are looking at Jesus and they're saying, all right, this is not what we expected. This is not what we were looking for. This guy certainly seems to us to be a false prophet. And so they want to show that to the people around them. And so what they do is they do exactly what John does, and they bring their questions and their uncertainties to Jesus. And they say, all right, look, if you say this is who you are, prove it. Do something to show us that you are who you are. And Jesus looks at them and he's not going to play their game. He says, look, if you're smart enough to look at the weather and predict what's going to happen tomorrow and see if it's going to rain or be sunny or whatever, you can look at what I'm doing and you can figure out who I am. And the only reason you're asking for a sign is because you're rebellious, so I'm not going to give you one. It's very interesting. Two very similar situations. Sets of people coming with uncertainties about who Jesus is, and one gets reasons to believe and one gets, I'm not going to play that game. What is the difference here? Now, I don't want to oversimplify here, but I really think that this is what it comes down to. It comes down to the fact that although John and the Pharisees both had uncertainties, John wanted to believe, and the Pharisees really didn't. John almost, you feel like if it came back that he didn't get some confirmation about Jesus, that he would be sad, that he would be weeping, that he hopes that his doubts don't come true. He hopes that he's right about Jesus. He wants it to be true. But the Pharisees, they would be happy to walk away. They would be happy to be rid of Jesus, to say, I'm not going to go there. For Jesus to pan out as sort of just another guy who came through Israel and didn't end up as anything. I really think that difference of bringing uncertainties and wanting them to fall apart so that we can believe, I really think that is the difference. Think of it this way. Have you ever been with a child who asks the question why over and over again? All right, so this can be either really fun or really frustrating, all right? It's really fun if the child is genuinely curious, if the child has real questions that they want to know about. They come to you because the world is a mysterious place to them. It's new, it's different, they don't understand it, and they're looking to you to help them figure it out. And so they ask, why do we do this? What's this all about? Why does this happen? How does this work? And they ask all these questions, and it's why? And that may be a little bit tiring just because, they usually have more energy than you, but it's a welcome experience. It's fun to be a part of a child learning about the world. And so you answer their questions. And sometimes you run into things that you just can't explain to them. They're just not going to get it, or they don't need to know that right now. But the questions themselves are not unwelcome. They're actually an expression of trust. They say, you are someone that I'm looking to guide me, someone I'm looking to tell me the truth, and so I trust you. I ask you my question. But on the other hand, there are the children who ask, why? And it's not out of curiosity, it's out of defiance. Usually it's you've told them to do something or they've asked to do something they can't do, and you say no, and they say, why? Well, can I stay up late? No. Well, why? Why not? Can I have another donut? No, you've had one already. No, why? Why can't I do that? Can I jump off the garage onto the trampoline? No, you can't. Why? Why can't I? Why? And the point is, those questions aren't real questions. They're not looking for answers. They're looking for loopholes. They're looking to wear you down. They're looking to get what they want to get. They want to do what they want to do. And in the end, even if you don't say it this way, the answer that it always comes down to is, because I said so. There is no reasoning in that situation. There is no explaining in that situation. And I think that's the difference between John and the Pharisees and Sadducees. I think the difference there is really genuinely looking for an answer to the question and using the question as a form of defiance. And I really think that for us, that is the difference between doubt that leads us closer to God and doubt that leads us farther away from God. We can cry out to God, God, where are you? God, I want to understand. I don't get this. But we cannot cry out to God, if you don't make it so that I understand, if you don't show yourself, I'm out of here. And that's the whole thing with the Pharisees and Sadducees. It's a veiled threat. The hidden premise in their question is, if you don't answer right, I'm going to leave. And it's held over Jesus' head, saying, you better give me certainty before I give you my trust. But John says, I give you my trust, please. Can there be a little bit more certainty? We need to have a category in our experience for the kinds of questions and uncertainty that lead to growth. A lot of us feel like there's only that question of, only that category of questions that are defiant, doubts that are rebellious. And so when we have questions, we have uncertainties, we tend to stuff them, we tend to keep them hidden. Maybe to convince ourselves that we're okay, to convince others that we're okay, maybe even convince God that we're okay, because we don't have uncertainties, so we're not wavering in our faith, so we're all right, God? But I really think that we need to have a category that talks about uncertainties that are good, or that are at least fruitful. Sometimes we talk about, we get confused because we talk about justification by faith, right? So we talk about the way that we find acceptance and approval by God is the fact that we have faith in him. And the word faith, though, gets confusing because we often use the word faith to mean something like belief or conviction or assent to things we believe to be true. And so when uncertainty comes in, we feel like, wait a minute, my faith is being eroded. What does that mean about where I stand with God? But what we need to see is that faith also refers to trust, that it's a relational term. It doesn't just mean I'm certain about certain facts, but I'm confident in a person. And I never want to pit those two things against each other. This is not sort of a relational faith and sort of an intellectual assent kind of thing. I don't think those two things are sort of opposites, but I think there's an important distinction that we need to have. That when questions come in about what we are certain about in terms of our beliefs, that we can still hold on to that trust as we seek for those answers. That we can still say, Jesus, I trust you. God, I trust you, even though I don't see clearly right now. And that's the difference between John and the Pharisees. That's the difference between faith that grows us and faith that destroys us. Let me make a few comments here about what I think this looks like and what I think it doesn't look like. First of all, what it doesn't look like is this. I don't think what we want to do is drown our doubts in piety. Sometimes this is what we think is expected of us. That if we want to hold on to trusting in Jesus, but we have uncertainties, well, I'm just going to pray more, I'm just going to read my Bible more, I'm just going to be involved in more worship services, and I'm just going to do more religious stuff. And hopefully, if I do enough of that stuff, the doubts will sort of just disappear. I don't think that's what we're talking about. Francis Schaeffer very wisely once said, if you try to pile everything on the donkey of devotion, pretty soon the donkey will lay down and die. It's true. You cannot address doubts through sort of devotional and pious activity, religious activity. They may be good for you. I'm not saying you should stop doing those things, or those should not be a part of the way you address uncertainty, but it's not the solution. You cannot put your hope in thinking that those things will get rid of your doubts. You have to face your doubts directly. You have to look them in the eye, and that's where the power of trust comes in. Because you can actually face your doubts, wherever they come from, whether it's personal pain, whether it's disenchantment with the church, whether it's intellectual questions, whatever it is, you can look those in the face and say, how do I address this? How do I respond to this? How do I understand this? Because you trust that somehow through that process, God is still going to be with you, and he's not going to abandon you with it. And on the other end, that there is going to be something like resolution, even if it's in the future. So we need to actually face and deal with our doubts directly. Second thing is this: we should never doubt alone. We should never doubt alone. One of the things about doubt is that it's very isolating. We tend to hide it, and this is for cultural reasons, this is for spiritual reasons. Doubt tends to be something that we suffer with by ourselves, and that's where it's the worst. It's most corrosive when it's unexpressed and it's just hidden in your heart and rattling around in your brain. I really think that there is great power in expressing the questions and uncertainties that we have, even if the person that we express them to has no answer or response. Sometimes that's even better. When they just say, you know what, you're not crazy, I've thought that too. That sometimes takes just enough edge off of it that you can say, all right, we can address this, we can think about this, we can face this. Third thing is this: I think that we should be equal opportunity doubters. What I mean by this is that whenever we question something that we hold as a conviction, if we're questioning our Christian beliefs, we also need to question where we would go if we left those beliefs. Where would we go if we left this place? One of my favorite scenes in the Gospels is in John chapter 6, and Jesus has just said some things that offended basically everybody. Everybody's confused and angry, and the crowds walk away, and the disciples are standing there with Jesus, and he goes, "You want to leave too?" And Peter, best response, he says, "Where would we go? You have the words of eternal life." Peter's considered his options. He's looked around. He says, I don't understand what Jesus is doing. I might not be into it right now. This may take me a while to figure out, but the alternatives aren't giving me something better. We need to put under scrutiny the things that we would go to if we left this just as much as we do the things that we currently believe. That's really, really important. Ask the hard questions of wherever you might land. Finally, this: in the midst of doubt, we need to look to Jesus. And I don't mean this just in sort of a pious activity kind of way. I mean, we really need to consider the person of Jesus and who he is and what he did. Jesus is the one who hung on the cross and he cried out, my God, why have you forsaken me?" He is the one who has experienced abandonment and silence from God deeper than any of us have. And so we need to look to him. We need to put our faith and trust in him, even in the midst of uncertainty. He is the one who bore our burden and took our sin and loves us, not because our uncertainties are resolved, but because we belong to him. He is the one who has the offer of hope. He's the one who makes it so that we know that one day we will see clearly. We will see face to face. We will not just know in part, we will know in full, even as we are fully known. He's the one who hung on the cross on Friday and cried out, "Where are you, God?" And on Sunday, that same God raised him from the dead. He's the one who can offer us hope in the midst of uncertainty and doubt and despair. We need to look to him. I want to encourage you, if you are in the midst of doubt and uncertainty, come to him. Where else would you go? He has the words of eternal life.